So welcome to our viewers who are switching from our previous link to this new link to our fifth webinar in a series of webinars bringing to light different groups and organizations throughout the world that are working and living in housing cooperatives. So I would also like to welcome our panelists from the US, the UK, Germany, Switzerland, and Australia, and to our moderator, who I will introduce in a minute. So I'm Julie Lapomme, Secretary General of Cooperative Housing International. I've been working in the co-op housing since the 1990s, doing organizational development, property management, information and data management, communications, and program management. So a bit of a Julie of all trades. Cooperative Housing International is part of the international cooperative movement. We are one of the 8 sectoral organizations that is part of the International Cooperative Alliance, which is a global umbrella organization for all types of cooperatives. So CHI is the association that's representing housing. Our main focus is to promote the cooperative housing model as a viable and human-centered housing solution. We facilitate knowledge sharing via peer-to-peer exchanges, and we advocate on behalf of housing co-ops, and we share good practices and create networking opportunities that connect cooperative and community-led practitioners and actors with one another, with civil society and policymakers. So these connections can have and do lead to interesting partnerships and collaborations, such as the Cohabitat Network, which we are going to hear a little bit more about shortly. So we have over 30 members spread out throughout the world on each continent. So here are some of their logos. Some of you might recognize some of them. So we essentially facilitate the connecting of these various organizations. And by doing so, we're highlighting good practices from around the globe. And by discussing key issues, we're ensuring that cooperative housing remains an innovative and flexible housing model that is adaptable to local and regional needs. So, so some of you might be familiar with cooperative housing, and some of you might be new to it. So cooperative housing is a legal entity, usually a cooperative or a corporation, which owns real estate consisting of one or more residential buildings. It operates under the cooperative legal framework that usually exists at the regional or national level. And then a cooperative is also guided by internationally recognized principles and values, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. So the co-op corporation is membership based, with membership granted by way of a share purchase in the cooperative, and each shareholder in a cooperative is granted the right to occupy a housing unit. So housing co-ops come in many forms. Some co-ops are townhouses and small buildings with just a handful of units, and others are large apartments style buildings with hundreds of units. Some co-ops are rental, whereas others are member-owned, which are also known as equity co-ops. And all the different models of co-op housing is a topic in itself, and that's for another webinar. So the fact that there's so many variants in the different models is an indication of how cooperative housing is an adaptable and flexible model that can work under so many different circumstances. So all of these different models are governed by a member elected body. So every member gets a vote in approving annual budgets, electing directors, and setting policies on the co-op's overall direction. Members can take part in various committees such as finance, maintenance, membership, social, sustainability, just to give a few examples. And so the other major component that is common throughout cooperatives is that their operations and governance are guided by 7 governing principles and are based on the ethical values of honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for others. So cooperatives are the only form of entrepreneurship organization with an internationally agreed and recognized definition, values, and principles. So the idea behind CHI doing webinars is to make cooperative housing, the cooperative housing model known on a wider scale, and to have an exchange between folks that are working in this sector and living in co-ops to discuss obstacles and the different perspectives that that are offered by this model in different contexts. So the goal is to raise awareness, plant a seed, and offer up some concrete examples of functioning co-ops, and talk about the benefits of living in a student co-op versus the other forms of housing. So today we'll talk about why housing cooperatives are great places to live for students, and how we can increase access to this affordable and community-oriented housing solution. So now I'm going to present Leah Oswald, who is a project manager for urbaMonde, a Swiss-based NGO. And Leah facilitates the Cohabitat network, which brings together some of the major grassroots organizations from the field of community-led housing. So Leah is going to explain the Cohabitat network and talk about Urban October and the Cohabitat social media campaign. So welcome, Leah.
Thank you, Julie. Hello, everybody. So thank you for the introduction. Yes, so I'm coordinating the Cohabitat network as part of my activities at the NGO urbaMonde, which is based in Switzerland, in Geneva. The Cohabitat network was created in 2014 and is a joint initiative by grassroots federations and umbrella organizations, as well as non-profit organizations and academic institutions working in the field of community-led housing. The Cohabitat network counts today 12 partners from across the world, like Cooperative Housing International, World Habitat, Habitat International Coalition, the Asian Coalition for Housing Rights, Slum Dwellers International, and so on. You can see on the slide the different logos and the wide variety of actors involved in this network. And so we work together to demonstrate the successes and potential of community-led housing and make it more widespread and attainable. We aim at creating a global and solidarity-based movement to respond together to the common challenges communities are facing to implement their right to adequate housing through participative processes. And we try to showcase and document and share different inspiring projects, for example, housing cooperative projects from around the world. We mainly work on documentation tools, and we organize experience exchanges and peer-to-peer learning. And we also started to work on designing affordable and collaborative financial tools. You will find more information on the Cohabitat network on our website that we can share with you. And yeah, Julie mentioned the Urban October campaign. So we are participating, starting actually now with this event, to give more visibility to community-led housing projects around the world through the whole month of October in the framework of the UN Habitat Initiative. So this month-long campaign will highlight different community-led housing projects through the social media networks and different events that we will be co-organizing with the partners of the Cohabitat network. So stay tuned on the social media, and you will discover also some very inspiring student housing cooperative examples. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. I had to find my mute button. So now I'm going to introduce Mariangela Veronesi. So So Mariangela will be moderating the session today, and she's the program lead for the Global Community-Led Housing Program at World Habitat, which is also a co-habitat partner. So World Habitat focuses on supporting collaborative housing solutions that promote affordability and social inclusion, primarily through knowledge exchanges and capacity building. So I'll let Mariangela introduce more of herself, and thank you, Mariangela, for moderating today's session.
Thank you, Julie, for the introduction and for bringing us all together through this webinar. So it's a great pleasure to be able to talk about the variety of models of student co-ops, student housing co-ops today that really aim to bring people together to have control over their own housing and to deliver it in a way that is based on housing as a right and not as a commodity. So I think you already said the important things about me, so I'll skip directly to our speakers. So we have an incredible panel from all over the world, from quite a range of countries. So it's very exciting to have everybody here. As our first speaker today, we have Bronwyn Walls. And Bronwyn is Director of Community Engagement at NASCO, which is the North American Students of Cooperation. And Bronwyn first discovered co-ops in 2012 as a student in Austin, Texas. And they soon began to recognize the larger implications of the cooperative movement. So we're really looking forward to hearing from you, and thanks for connecting from New Orleans today. Then we have Jens Uwe Köhler from Studentendorf in Berlin. And Jens has a really interesting path, which involves being part of a student campaign in 1998 against the demolition of Studentendorf Schlachtensee, or Student Village. And I will let Jens tell you more about the details of that. But just as a little spoiler, the campaign was successful and it did save the Student Village, which was bought by the cooperative that was created for this purpose, of which Jens has been CFO since 2004. So we also have Joanne Gesti Franquesa and Sébastien Perrault, who work respectively on internal relations and in the general administration of La Sigue, which is one of the largest student housing co-ops in Europe and potentially in the world, with around 800 rooms in the city of Geneva in Switzerland. We also have Scott Jennings, who is a graduate entry medical student at the University of Nottingham in the UK. And Scott has set up the Nottingham Student Housing Co-op in 2015 and is also involved at national level in student co-op homes. And last November, Scott was able to visit the NASCO Institute in Austin, and we'll be hearing later about how that has influenced the movement back home in the UK. So that's pretty exciting too. And last but certainly not least, we have Farron Thornycroft. Farron is a student at the University of Sydney and has lived at Sydney Student Housing Co-op, also known as STOCO, since 2017, where they have filled many different roles, including vice presidents amongst many other functions. And with a background in Australian Sign Language, Farron is working towards increasing inclusion and accessibility, as well as building connections with other co-ops across Australia. So yeah, once again, thank you all for joining us from all areas of the world, to both the speakers and the participants. So I guess we can dive in with the questions. So you all represent organizations linked to student co-op housing, and we'd like to ask you to introduce them to us so we can hear briefly about these co-ops and what issues they respond to, how they have come about, and we'll have more of a chance later to go into some of the details, but it would be great to have an initial overview. And Bronwyn, if we can start with you, that would be great.
Yes, thank you. Hi, my name is Bronwyn Walls. I am the Director of Community Engagement for NASCO, which stands for the North American Students of Cooperation. We are a network of co-ops formed in 1968 all across the United States and Canada. And we were initially formed to expand the student co-op movement across college campuses. And we've grown in scope a bit since then, but we still do focus a lot on campus cooperatives, and many of our members today still serve student communities. So NASCO is, as I mentioned, a membership association or a network of co-ops across the US and Canada. And we have about, or just over 40 member co-ops, and those members represent around 3,500 individuals in the US and Canada. So we're a really large group of cooperators. Our members range greatly in size, demographics, urban versus rural location, and kind of how they operate as well. So NASCO, just to share a little bit more about what we do, while Julie pulls up the slide there, we hold conferences, events, and regional gatherings for co-ops, and that includes co-op members, co-op directors, co-op staff, basically anybody involved in a student housing cooperative. We hold kind of events and conferences and gatherings that are kind of specifically tailored to those needs and those challenges, and we have a strong focus on peer exchange. We support leadership development in cooperators through a one-year cooperative leadership certification program, a summer internship placement service that connects students to paid co-op internships and job opportunities. We also manage properties. NASCO Properties is a branch of NASCO that owns 15 properties across the US, which we then lease back to the cooperatives. And then we leverage that equity that we have from that property ownership to purchase additional properties or to save co-ops who are facing some sort of financial crisis. We also support co-ops looking to start, expand, or take on major real estate projects through technical assistance. And we provide education, consulting, and network weaving through various channels in our network. So yeah, that's NASCO in a nutshell. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your summary. It's great to hear from such a kind of like established and widespread network across more than one country, which I think is the only, NASCO is the only one in this seminar that has been able to reach more than one country. So that's quite interesting to kind of have this geographical spread. So thanks for giving us this introduction. I'd then like to pass the word on to Jens from Studentendorf.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Jens Köhler from Studentendorf Schlachtensee Co-op in Berlin. We have a students' village bought from the state of Berlin. Next. The students' village is located in the southwest of Berlin near Free University. We have about 930 rooms here in the village. And the most important thing about the location is that we are in the former American sector of Western Berlin. Next, please. The village has over 28 buildings, 24 for living and 4 common buildings, 1 administration building, 1 library, 1 kindergarten, and 1 really big common house. You will see on later slides. It was built in 3 construction phases in the 50s, in the 60s, and in the 70s. Next, please. The cornerstone laying ceremony was in 1957. You can see here Eleanor Lansing Dulles and Willy Brandt, the later Chancellor of West Germany. And next, please. Here you can see 2 big themes of the village: re-education and lighthouse to the east. Re-education is the will of the Allies after World War II to teach German people after the years of fascism, democracy, freedom, and international understanding. And the village should be an ideal democracy where a new democratic ally should learn things together. Here you can see our organization panel. In the middle, the Dorfrat is the parliament of the village. which should choose the mayor of the village, a student mayor. And on the right side, you can see a picture from the 60s, I think, from the early years of the village. And lighthouse means that Western Berlin should be a lighthouse to Eastern Germany and to Eastern Europe as a free city. And the village should show as one of the gifts of the American government in Berlin. We have 5 or 6 big buildings, which are gifts of the American government to show people how free people can live in the Western world. Next, please. Here are some pictures of our common house and of our administration building. The architecture should be a democratic architecture. There are a lot of glass in the houses so that you have a democratic transparency, especially in the administration building, so that you can see the place where decisions were made. And you can see the water there. This is like a mirror, that when you made a decision, you can mirror yourself to think about your decision you made. And on the right side, this is our common house with a big student pub, with a gym, with laundry, and in the top, we have a really big cinema and theater hall. About 150 people can stay there. Next, please. Here are some of our living houses. These houses were made for groups of about 30 people. In the first years, divided between men and women. This was ended in '68, and in the houses should live people from Eastern Germany, Western Germany, and from international countries together to learn from each other, to teach each other. And next, please. And you can see the structure of the houses. There were small rooms where you can live in, and a lot of common rooms, common spaces, like common kitchens, common bathrooms, so that you always have to meet each other. You have to talk with each other, and you could not separate yourself. So we have a strong community in the village always. Next, please. But over the years, the village become forgotten because of the insolvents of the foundation. So the village become a part of the Studentendorf, which is the public sector of student housing in Germany normally. And you can see how bad the houses were, but we always had a strong community. But in the last 90s, next please, the land of Berlin tried to sell the property to get good money, because Southwest is a rich part of Berlin. And the inhabitants, like me in this time, we had a good self-administration there. We had a good organization. We had a little bit of money, and we took all this money to fight against demolition of the village, against that the property was sold. And next, please. Also, dogs were against. And you can see a discussion panel with the president of the Free University, the former minister of science of Berlin, and me on the right side in former years, in younger years. And we got a lot of people who gave us help, who supported us. Next, please. Especially architects, people who know a lot of real estate development, monument savers, because the village was a monument since 1991. And so together we found the co-op. These are the only pictures. And we bought the village with 4.7 million euro we didn't have in this time. And we took the village with half destroyed and just 20 inhabitants in 2003. So that's for the first about our history.
Great, thank you so much. It's really interesting to know about the historical context that has led to what it is today, which we're looking forward to hear more about what it does today later on. But it's really relevant to know the roots of your cooperative. So thank you so much for that. I would now like to pass the word to Lesigu.
Yeah.
And hear about the model from Geneva.
All right. So yes, we are going to present to you our cooperative in a few words. So Lesigu is a housing cooperative for students and internship and interns. We work according to self-management principles. This is in a different ways that we will explain later. And our main goal is to solve a housing problem for students here in Geneva. To do so, we are a non-profit organization. We are glad to be 95% financially independent. So then we can be politically self-managed also. And yeah, we provide to do so. To reach this goal, we provide cheap accommodation in a really expensive city in shared apartments. Our shared apartments is also a political ambition to self-manage our way of life with other students. And we try to promote also a big ecological perspective on our buildings, but also on our lifestyle. So yeah.
Yes, hello, I'm Sebastian. So some other quick facts. The average rent of a room is like 350 Swiss franc, which is about 350 US dollar. We have 800 rooms. We have different types of shared apartment, small ones from 2 people to 15 room. We have a few studio home, but we have like 20 studios, and we have 5 family apartments for students who has children. We own 8 buildings, and we have 2 buildings projects under construction. Almost all of our buildings have also commercials areas on the first floor, like bicycle cooperative, social cafe, artist workshops, and so. And the total value of our buildings is today about 35 million US dollar. Next, please.
So to live in our cooperative, you must fill some criteria that has to be filled during all the time staying at the cooperative. First of all, for just juridic legal issues, you have to be older than 18 years old. Then you have to be a student as a main activity, and we try not to focus only on the classic university student that we could have in mind. We also have on-the-job training. We also have technical university students. We also have internships in a lot of international organizations here in Geneva. And then the third criteria is a proof that your income is lower than 3,000 francs per month. That could sound a lot for other countries, but you have to know that here in Switzerland, the minimum wage, for example, in Geneva, it's about 4,000 francs per month. So we have this social perspective. The maximum stay in the cooperative is of 5 years, which it has some advantages. In this way, we have a big turnover, a lot of fresh air in the cooperative, a lot of creativity, but also some organization challenges that that we try to solve. And what it is interesting in our cooperative also is that the inhabitants in each apartment, they choose with who they want to live. They choose their new roommate during a meeting that they organize. There are only those three criteria for everybody, but then we also, in a self-managed perspective, want to decentralize the power, and then each apartment can decide with who they want to live. We want to explain to you that our cooperative is 30 years old, more or less. It started with a big help of the Students' Union of the university, who was aiming to bring forward a cooperative, a students' cooperative for accommodation. And then very quickly, a constitutive assembly of the cooperative was organized. We could say that the historical context in Geneva was very particular. A lot of squads here were very, very active in this period. And and some years after, the right, the political parties of the right wing decided to stop this movement. So creating cooperatives was a way of trying to legalize or to institutionalize the situation of the squat movement. Then you see that the first building that Sigu had was some years after the creation, in 1998, with the opening of Montbriand. And after that, we had an exponential croissance, you say.
Grow.
Next.
Yes, and these dates are real quick. The others building we did construct. We can skip to next. Okay, I'm trying to explain real quick. We have two type of house. We have the half of the cooperative, which are houses that we are owner, that we did built on land, but we own only the building. We don't own the land. The land is leased generally by the state or the city or the public landowner. So that's the way we make it happen. And so that's the first half that we own, and then the second half, it's the next slide. We have a lot of houses or that the owner borrow or rent to us at low price, but in medium short terms, because most of the time these houses are planned to be destroyed or they will make it new. So they borrow us these houses for 2 or 3 years, for example, waiting, for example, construction permit or destruction permit, and we occupy them. So that's the second side, the way we create student housing.
Maybe I don't know if there's a few other things, but if that's okay, we might go on to a few more details later on. I know there's a lot to say, but there's fortunately a bit of space later on for a few extra things. And now if I could ask Scott, if you can tell us a bit more about your own context.
Sure. So student cooperative homes, I mean, I'm going to do the worst thing you do on a PowerPoint, which is actually read the slide. That's because like the definition we use on our website, I think is quite a good one. So student cooperative homes is a national cooperative in the UK, controlled by student housing co-ops and its supporter investors. Established to promote, enable and scale up student housing cooperatives in the UK. And then the second line is also key. It shows that our main function is to be the vehicle for property acquisition and development of our members to access housing. The reason this is important is that, I'll go next slide actually, I'll jump forward. Kind of the next, the reason that's important is the housing cooperatives in the UK only begin in 2014, and in the sub slides after this I'll explain a little bit of that. But the context as to why we needed student co-op homes, or indeed student housing co-ops full stop in the UK, is kind of summed up by some of the points in this slide from the National Student Accommodation Survey, which, you know, showed everyone bar the student housing co-ops as far as I remember. You know, 50% of our students in the UK struggle to pay their rents because our loan system for students has not kept up with the cost of living. 90% experience issues with the housing around, you know, all kinds of standards of living. Only 15% get all of their deposits back because there's a bit of a cartel of landlords pocketing, you know, there's a certain amount in a deposit in the UK you're not allowed to contest. So that's money that's being pocketed out of students' pockets. And many students now need to borrow extra money from, you know, the bank of mum and dad or from other forms in order to pay for their accommodation, and it causes massive issues for mental health. Next, please. And a bit of extra context is our movement comes around the 2012 onwards mark. So for context, for any who don't know, 2012 is when we unfortunately had a Conservative government had been elected and had decided they were going to triple our tuition fees from £3,000 to £9,000 annually. So obviously people took to the streets, big protests, we lost. And there was a lot of kind of dissatisfaction in the student movement about what happened, how that went down. And so many students tried to look to alternatives where they would actually have some kind of control, because the increased marketization of education at that point was a real issue, and it still is a big issue. And so they tried to get student housing co-ops going. Now, we don't have a very big housing co-op sector in the UK overall. It's down to many historical factors, like we had loads of state provision of housing, so housing co-ops didn't arise to a demand in such a strong way. So student housing co-ops didn't spin out, but there are a few examples from our history. There was one in Northern Ireland I've come across by accident. There was one in London, which unfortunately by the time the students got it made, it was no longer students living there, so it wasn't a student housing co-op. There was an attempt in the 2000s to get one going in Manchester, which was very promising, but backers pulled out at the last moment. So we were very much starting from nothing. If I go next, those two posters are from the first two student housing cooperatives. So the Edinburgh Student Housing Cooperative is where I'll start first. So the Edinburgh Student Housing Cooperative is the largest student housing cooperative in the UK. And it kind of got going by a student campaign, very much along the lines I'm hearing from you guys as well, as the student campaign started around affordable housing, especially in Edinburgh, where it is very expensive. And I've got a slide later that shows the scale of the problem. They held a referendum with their students' union to get the students' union to do something and support them. That was passed by like 90-something%. I forget the figure, but it was a super majority. And so they facilitated meetings with the city councils, all this kind of thing. And it happened to be that the housing association that does central Edinburgh had a vacant former hall on their books that was vacant, and they decided to take a punt on a bunch of students and see if they could actually run a student housing co-op, bearing in mind none existed before this point. And so that's 106 beds in the centre of Edinburgh that's affordable, and so they're a great success. Kind of open question there about how student unions can be good stakeholders sometimes, or they won't be. The other guys on the other slide is the Birmingham Student Housing Cooperative and the Sheffield Student Housing Cooperative. So the context for this one is that Vivian Waddell, who is the gentleman on the right, is the director of Student Cooperative Homes, was the founder of the phone cooperative, which came about when they privatized all of our telecommunications in the UK. And the phone cooperative was very Principle 6 minded. It wanted to invest in all kinds of exciting things. And Vivian had even been in meetings in the 90s in the UK for people who had thought of doing student housing co-ops, but nothing ever came of them. the phone cooperative invested in a property in Birmingham, got them launched first, and I hate being dragged into this one, so I'll be diplomatic. Birmingham's the first in England and Edinburgh is the first in Scotland, and that is the last I will say on the matter. And so you end up in a situation where they launched very successfully. The following year, Sheffield Student Housing Cooperative started. However, by that point, the phone cooperative could not justify investing more in student housing. They're not a student housing provider. They had started, they created a roadmap and a financial track record for the movement to try and get things going. Next, please. And so kind of who our other members are very quickly. Our membership is made up of student housing cooperatives and our investors. So as of February, we did a community share issue, something I'll discuss later, which brought in 150 plus supportive individuals or institutions. I think there's a few in here who may have invested, who basically are supporters of us, want to engage positively and help develop the student housing cooperative sector. And then the others are the other student housing cooperatives who don't have property. So my own Nottingham is on the verge of acquiring something. Glasgow Student Housing Cooperative is close. And then you have the Sea Salt Student Housing Cooperative based in Brighton and the Leeds Student Housing Cooperative that are various stages of development. And so that's kind of the makeup of our membership as it stands. But there is always other housing co-ops appearing, like these groups of students who hear the idea, are inspired and want this to happen. Next, please. I think there's one more. Yeah, and so we launched student cooperative homes very quickly to do, well, as this shows, give measles to the whole of Britain. And so essentially develop this across the length and breadth of the UK. And so I'll kind of leave that there to come back to stuff later.
Thanks, Scott. It's really interesting how kind of all of a sudden there's an interest across the country, and there's also an effort to not see these as like individual alone projects, but for them to actually all be united in, you know, as an actual movement. So that's very interesting too. I'll now move on to Farron, if you'd like to tell us more about Stucco.
Thank you. I'm calling in from Stucco. Before I get started, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. There are First Nations people of the area, also known as Sydney. And the sovereignty of this land was never ceded. And I'd like to pay my respect to elders past, present, emerging, both on the land that I'm calling in from, and to extend that to all First Nations people who are watching and across Australia. So on the first slide that I've got, there's a photograph of Stucco. It's the architect design of Stucco. And Stucco started 28 years ago.
Julie, sorry to interrupt you, Fern. Julie, if you could go back on the Stucco slide, if you don't mind. Julie? Oh. There, perfect. Thank you so much. Cool. Cheers. Sorry to interrupt.
That's all good. This is Stucco. We're based in Sydney. We're connected to the University of Sydney, and we're partly owned by the Department of Housing, partly by the University of Sydney, and we also have shares in the building ourselves. Julie, we keep on seeing your emails.
So yeah, the PowerPoint keeps crashing, so I'm just trying to open it now.
Good.
Here we go.
Yeah, so we have 40 rooms at the cooperative. Amongst 8 different units. So there's 5 rooms per unit, and we so run very much like a house share on the day-to-day, but also as a cooperative. We have 4 committees. There's membership, Panda, finance, and building and maintenance. And so each of our members are allocated to a committee when they move in, and we run through those committees. We also have every 15 days the GM meets. Up to the slide with the pandas on it. I'll explain the presence of the pandas. Pandas is short for problems in administration, because as part of cooperatives, there's many positives, but problems do sometimes arrive. So we have a committee that attempts to deal with those. People get in based on interviews. We have a standing interview list, and people are required to come to 3 meetings prior to applying for residency at our cooperative. This is to ensure that they understand the ethos and values of the cooperative and how we run. And then when people have attended those meetings and we have a vacancy, we call up all the people on the interview list and we interview by unit and consider need first and foremost, as we provide affordable housing, and also expect our members to contribute to the cooperatives. So that's another major thing that we emphasize. We try and have something called a 4-hour work week. So 2 of those hours is attending meetings and at least 2 hours of contributing to the daily runnings of the cooperative. I think that's me. There were a few photographs of the co-op, but it sounds like the PowerPoint hasn't been working.
Yeah, sorry for the technical difficulties.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's I don't know, it just keeps crashing. So what for the next parts, I'll just try and figure a workaround, and we'll work with that.
Yeah, we'll find hopefully a solution. Thank you so much for connecting. For this explanation and surviving the technical difficulties, and also special thank you because it's very late in Australia at the moment. So we're very grateful for your in the middle of the night presence. So thank you everybody that got to explain a bit about about the co-ops that they're part of. It's really interesting, and as you've seen, there's different models and very different ways in which they've come about. So it's interesting that in wanting to house students through co-ops, there's quite a wide varieties of ways in which that can be done. So I'd now like to ask you a bit more about what it's like to live in a student co-op and what are the motivations and benefits for students to consider this form of housing, and what you or other students find interesting about this model. So if you could share a few examples, if you could pick 1 or 2 things that have motivated people to join a student co-op housing. Oh, is this the stucco one?
Yes, that's stucco. Great.
Well, if you want to go first, that would be amazing. And yeah, here we go.
Great. So this photograph shows my unit. It's one of the 5. We're unit 4. Well, one of the 8, and we're unit 4, and my lovely housemates, which make one of my personal favorite things about living in the co-op is the social nature of the cooperative. For sure, if you go on, that just shows a building of it. The building is in the middle, and to the left we have the university and the trains. So we're really lucky for where our co-op's situated, because it's a 5-minute walk to the train station and a 15-minute walk to the university. So it's really lucky, the location that we have, particularly as it's in the middle of the city, and generally accommodation in this area is at least $200, $240 upwards. The college accommodation is $480 often, and we're able to offer rent at $105 a week, which is like half the cheapest place you could find, and people get their own rooms, which is not always the norm. Moving on. We have quite a lot of social events and parties, obviously pre-COVID, but on the left we have a potluck dinner that we ran for midwinter solstice, which is just a really lovely example of the sharing and the communal nature of the cooperative. And even throughout COVID and during lockdowns, it's been a really lucky place, and to be isolating, but like as a collective together. This is just 2 other housemates in the gardens. Oops. I think I've... And another really important thing I found is the autonomy that we have over the building. So this happened when I recently moved in. We had soundproof doors. That was a project as part of the university, because we've got a major communal hall that our meetings get held in, but also band practices and parties. So we've got these soundproof doors that we all communally painted. We decided what colors to paint them. And I think it's wonderful being able to have that sort of level of autonomy over the building. And it's also amazing because we develop a lot of skills living in the cooperative. I've been involved in different committees, and the sort of management, financial understanding of managing large sums of money and building up keep, as well as simple DIY stuff that we pick up along the way, has been really beneficial, I feel, to myself and to others in the co-op. Onwards. And of course, when we aren't managing the building and stuff, we're building Lego of the building. No, actually, if you go on to the next slide, this is meant to show that we have a communal study space. And I really appreciate that we live with so many other students. I think it's really beneficial. During university, when I was in first year, I lived 2 hours away, which meant I spent 4 hours commuting each day. So to be so close is really valuable, but it also meant that I wasn't able to meet with other students so much. So as a cooperative, there are people studying so many different degrees at the university. So we're able to study together and share information, and it can be really surprising the level of overlap between different people's subjects. I've got a friend, housemate studying music, and we had theories in common with government and international relations. So that's another real positive of living in the co-op.
Great, thank you so much. It does sound like an amazing place to live. So thank you for sharing that. If I can ask Scott, if you can go next.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, I mean, one of the taglines for something we're talking about later that we did with the campaign with when we launched Student Cooperative Homes in 2018 was, there is no landlord, we are the landlords, we are in charge. And I think that screams back to something that's very true about our housing situation in many university cities, but kind of the system as a whole, is that we are totally disempowered outside of housing cooperatives. Even the idea of tenants unions in the UK is still very new, very fresh, and though having success still needs time to mature and really get its foot down in many cities. There's some like London where it's become essential, they need to take action, but other places it's slower. I'll go next on that one actually. But yeah, it's, oh, sorry, my laptop's just frozen, 1 second. There we go, cool. There we go. So yeah, so one of the key areas are like, you know, one of the most visible ways, and I think this was mentioned previously by Farron, was like the ability to actually control the fabric of the building is somewhat of a novelty of housing co-ops. There's no other setup that will give you that. So to give examples of what you've got on there, the centre on the top left is was Alex, who was a former member of the Edinburgh Student Housing Co-op, who was actually a live-in architect student. Great for him from an experience perspective from having chatted to him. But him and many of the others undertook renovation projects of the Edinburgh Student Housing Cooperative building. Many things were towards the end of their life cycle, or that was coming up in the foreseeable future. So the cooperative kind of had to launch very quickly into doing repairs, maintenance, and upgrading. And so they had, for example, in both, one building, both buildings, one of them was a garage basement and the other one was just a plain old basement. These were cold, dark, underground garages, right? And they're actually technically below street level in one case. The guys initiated a entirely student-led redesign, renovation, converting, you know, spaces that weren't habitable spaces into these really cool social spaces. The project is getting there. I think it's nearly complete. The flooring is in, all this kind of stuff has been done by them. And they found that very liberating to skill up and do those things. But the Birmingham Student Housing Cooperative, which is the property on the bottom left, 805 Pershore Road, you can see this picture from this era where the garage was being torn out to be converted to create extra bed space. And Chris in the right is sitting in that room. Unfortunately, I don't have a wide angle of that. And that was one where the students wanted to do all the work themselves, but ended up compromising to bring in another kind of more social, what I would call social housing cooperative, so more on the kind of social housing end of the spectrum, as we'd call it. But they have many support services, contractors, etc. So they did a mix of work together to increase the capacity of this building and do renovations. And that's been a theme that's been ongoing. I don't have pictures, but Sheffield Student Housing Cooperative has done similar work to a smaller extent. Next, please. And a big thing from my perspective for Nottingham that we started things on, and this has been touched on already many times, is the community aspect of it. Now, I always divide it into two sections. There's internal community and there's external community. The internal community stuff, I think, is far more obvious. It's as I think Farron has spoken about it much better than I can, which is you're living together, you're getting on, communal spaces, you force interactions, or, you know, as the Studentendorf architecture encourages, people interact. But there's also the external stuff, which I actually think is the stuff that can be too easily overlooked in housing co-ops and is actually really beneficial. In the context of the student housing sector broadly in the UK, there is a real perception problem that has some basis in fact, and some of it's not fair, which is that students are a downright negative on locals, right? And to an extent, this was to do with the expansion of higher education, which is a good thing, but also was very deleterious to local communities where there was no controls put in place to distribute students more equitably. And so lasting damage has been done to areas. In the case of my areas in Nottingham, Lenton is the student dense area. The locals, you don't want to go to a local residents association meeting if you're a student, because you will have your head ripped off, because they are so sick of the damage that's been done. They've lost their school, that the place isn't clean. It's all these kinds of things. And I think, you know, student housing cooperatives are also a student-led response to bad housing from landlords, but also to raise the standards of students. You know, we're not actually the problem, but the system we live in is the problem, and it encourages people to be apathetic to others in their community. But the other cool things is what we've done already with what limits we have. So top left image is a good one. That's the Sea Salt Student Housing Cooperative going to stay at Birmingham and kind of live and experience that, take that knowledge back. Top right was Zoe, who was a member of I think she was a founding member of Birmingham Student Housing Cooperative, who taught BSL, British Sign Language, for free from the housing co-op. After teaching everyone in the house it, just made it a big community thing. And it was really popular for a very long time until Zoe obviously moved on and did other things. They did big communal, pre-COVID, sorry if I'm depressing anyone with like all these gathering pictures as well, but yeah, bottom right, big meals of people, more than 6 in the context of the UK, which is all we're allowed now. And then the bottom left is actually the Edinburgh Student Housing Cooperative basement, which looks more habitable than the images we might have seen earlier. The idea of that space was to either for nominal rents or for nothing in certain cases, to allow social projects or campaigns or insert here to access that space, as well as it be a space for the co-op. So it was a really good community thing to provide. A space in Edinburgh is expensive at the best of times, but it was a great thing they've done. Maybe not going to be used for that at the moment, I'm not going to lie. Next please. And so this is kind of also coming to the other side of things, which is more relevant and where we kind of come from, certainly where I come from. I'm kind of I've created a term, which is basically the cursed founders, who are basically the people who put themselves to the grindstone to make these things happen, and we're not going to end up living in them one way or another, but you're too deep in to not see it through. You have a bit too much pride on the line. And so, for us, actually, for those of us who've never had the chance and have gone through, and our co-ops didn't get founded in our time frame inside of higher education, it's actually been still very positive. These co-ops do meet each other. We train up, we do skill learning. It's the cooperative entrepreneurship, which is like underappreciated in society as a thing, is still unbelievably positive. And many people go on to do community organizing. They go on to the tenancy union movement actually has some of the former cooperators. You're also looking at things like the phone cooperative absorbed some of the people who founded the Birmingham Student Housing Cooperative. That link was so strong and positive. And it was a quick one. Actually, I'll go next slide. I'll jump to the next slide before I come to that one. Thank you. So the other cool thing is, and Bron's probably going to see this image and be like, hey, it's Tristan. So international cooperation has kind of been baked into the way that Nottingham was, the way that the UK student housing cooperative sector started. For context, one of the founders of Birmingham went on a big old tour of Ann Arbor and a couple of others in the US, kind of asked the question of why don't we have these? Let's have these. It says a lot about Britain when we have to go to America to get a good idea when there was the Studentendorf and Geneva. But anyway, moving on. And so Tristan was was a president for a long time at the Toronto campus co-op, a director of NASCO, and he was coming on a trip. We organized for him to come over. In the same trip, he went to see the Studentendorf and a couple of others at the same time. And so these international links have kind of been building, and I think you can draw a bit of a line between our engagement and kind of me and Tristan's initial like Facebook messages that kind of led to like snowball as this really positive link up of international cooperation. And I got to go to NASCO Institute, and I'm not going to lie, that was pretty fun. Happy I went pre-COVID. Next, please. I think there's one more. Yes, and so actually, yeah, just beyond the kind of the niceties of kind of like, oh, it's nice to have friends, it's nice to have a nice warm house, all these kind of things. Actually, if we boil down just to the pure math of it in a UK context, as you guys have already been saying about the finances in Geneva and other places, like that is the difference between the Edinburgh Student Housing Cooperative and its nearest competitors in 2018-19 year. I mean, it's like £150 a month cheaper. Like the margins that are being ripped out of students because there's no alternative on the scale is a serious problem for us. And that's one of the reasons Student Cooperative Homes was necessary. We needed a framework that was going to allow national development of a movement and to grow quickly. So yeah, I'll kind of leave that one there.
Great, thank you so much for all these points that, yeah, definitely want to, definitely, I think would make anybody want to live in a co-op, whether they're a student or not, or maybe try to go back in time and be a student again so you can live in a student co-op. I just wanted to make a little comment before we continue about if anybody has any questions that relate to any of these points, please put them into the YouTube comments so we can then pick them up and collect them at the end, either general questions or to specific speakers. So just a reminder that at the end we'll have a little question and answer session. If I can ask Bronwyn, if you can give us your perspective too, that would be great.
Yeah, of course, happy to. I'm probably going to repeat a little bit because Farron and Scott made some amazing points, but I do want to start off with some actual testimonials from members of NASCO member co-ops. And I'll read the first one and let everybody else read the second one. But one member says, in terms of how their co-op has shaped them, shaping me into a resilient, compassionate person, allowing me to organize events and learn from a lot of different folks and feel capable to make a difference. Also, affordable housing is probably the main reason I can even attend college. Anything more expensive than what I'm paying would be near impossible to afford without working 40+ hours as I was last year. So I think that speaks to a number of points. Some of what Scott was mentioning about housing affordability, especially for students in the UK, is also very similar in the US. Unfortunately, a lot of real estate investors kind of take advantage of students in many ways, and a lot of students, it actually contributes to decreased accessibility for higher education for many folks because there's no affordable housing solutions for them. So affordability, cannot be talked about enough, I think, especially for students who, and obviously the student debt crisis in the US is a major one as well. So already students are going into major debt trying to access higher education, much less being able to afford a living situation. So yeah, you can go on to the next slide. I will share some specific examples as well and talk about some additional benefits. So yeah, aside from affordability, things that were already mentioned, control of your living situation through democratic decision-making, community and interdependence, and then investing in future students beyond yourself too. So knowing that as a student living in a student housing co-op, everything that you give to the co-op in terms of time in terms of painting a mural on the wall or feeding your housemates. All of that is going towards the sustainability of this co-op for years to come. And I think that's a really powerful point to make as well. So I wanted to share this example. Oh, can you go back one actually? Yeah, I wanted to share this example of College Houses, a co-op in Austin, Texas. And this is the co-op that I'm actually an alum of. I lived in College Houses when I was in school. They own 7 properties in Austin, and they're near 2 different campuses. They have a focus on fostering community, supporting education, and promoting personal development and well-being. Especially this picture on the right here inside one of the kitchens. I wanted to touch on a point that Farron made earlier about, they mentioned that at Stucco members give, I think you said 6 hours a week or 4 hours a week, maybe, to the co-op. That is really similar in a lot of US co-ops, especially. A lot of students share communal spaces and share responsibilities for those communal spaces, such as kitchens, dining halls, recreational rooms. And then there's a labor system built into that requires members to contribute a certain amount of time back to the co-op. So that could include cooking meals for shared dinners, cleaning the common spaces, gardening, doing administrative work for the co-op, planning events, all sorts of things like that. So not only does that continue to contribute to this sense of community and this sense of investment in community, but it's also an opportunity for professional development and skill building. So a lot of times folks will come out of the co-ops with real life professional experience in anything from administration to event planning to nonprofit management to fundraising. And then this also contributes to, oftentimes members will come out of their co-op and get involved in nonprofits or activism and social justice work, which is something that we see a lot with our members when we survey them, is that they tend to be heavily involved in volunteer work and contributing back to their neighborhoods and their communities. And then I'll share one more example if you want to go to the next slide. So this is WCRI in Waterloo. This is Canada's largest student housing cooperative and NASCO's largest co-op member. They typically have around 800 members a year, and they also have 7 different buildings near 2 campuses. And they offer by far the most affordable housing in the area for students. I wanted to mention this just because it's a little bit different from the other example I gave, just to show the variety in types of housing cooperatives. This is like a little bit more apartment style or dorm style. And because of that kind of large scale and pooling of resources, they really get to offer that extreme affordability, that vast difference. So they have less communal spaces, but they have a lot of different ways that students can get involved in how the co-op is run. They do a lot of student run events. They have a weekly dinner club, and they offer a lot of different avenues for involvement. And they do have some really fun recreational rooms. They have a big kind of den area with a pool table and lots of murals and a bar and things like that. And it's a really great space to host events. So yeah, I think that's it for my piece on that. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. Also, once again, very, very inspiring. If I could ask Jens, if you could go next, please.
Yes, I can. Next slide, because it's, yeah. Here you can see some of our common areas as well. Parties on the left bottom, you can see some karaoke. In the middle is the office of our self-administration in the 90s, and the gym we built by ourselves in the 90s. And on the left, the big picture is our students' pub, made by students or run by students from the middle of the 70s. We had always managers from the students. Everything were on a really good. We didn't get a lot of money for the work, so just to have a good place where people can meet. We made different meals from different countries there, and it was a good place to meet in the village. Next, please. As we started our co-op, we were all moved out from the village. We are former students, former inhabitants, and so we make our co-op for students who will come to Berlin now and in the last years. And we have strong management. Most of the people who live in the village are not members of the co-op. We want to change this, but we have to make a bigger discussion about. So we have a community manager in the moment who organize our events for students. We can deal with fire too, like Austin can. And yeah, next please. We try to organize events. Here you can see a summer party on our village place. Next, please. Gardening as well. So you can see our same things as in the other co-ops too. We try to organize, we try to make with the students live there, but we see that it's really hard to move people. They have a lot of things to do with studying, getting money sometimes. So to say, come together, let us organize everything by ourselves is a really hard job. And we will struggle with this issue, I think, in the next 5 or 6 years, because what I have learned at NASCO Institute, what I saw in Edinburgh too, it's like we did in the 90s in our self-administration. We had a strong student community. We did a lot of things for ourselves, but not running our village. This was another administration by the public part of the city. Now we took our village to us, but we are not longer inhabitants. So that's our thing, what we are discussed a lot of in the last years. But in my next slide, you would see what we had to do over the last years. Not this one. I have some pictures on the other, for the third part. And this is what I want. What moves us in the moment, that we had a lot of things to do to make a revival of the village after 20 inhabitants and half destroyed. We had a lot of to do with renovation. When you go some steps, please. Can you see my forecast for the next 15 years? We made everything new, everything fine, but we have a lot of debts in the moment. We had invested about 30 million euro to make everything fine. And we have to take about 400 euros rent per month. What is cheap in Berlin in the moment was really okay. But to save all this, we need a strong organization and to give students who live in the village, who come here for 4 years, the responsibility for 30 million debts. That's a hard thing, and we have to discuss all these problems to maybe make a change to more self-organization. Yep, thanks.
Thank you so much. It's interesting to see how things change throughout time, and how there's how mobilization kind of, the initial mobilization also created a lot of engagement, and that you're considering these questions of how to maintain that participation throughout time. So that's really interesting. And then if I can ask Seb from Sigur, I believe Jean has had to leave in the meanwhile, I think.
Yes, he did.
So now you're our representative, our sole representative.
I have to represent. Okay, so yeah, about I won't repeat what you said before, but the affordability of the rent is really a big issue in Geneva too. We have the lowest price in Geneva, and the next cheaper is like the double of our price. So we have almost the same that you did, as you said before. And what can I say about the organization? We say small is beautiful. So when you have, like, for example, in Australia, only one house, I think it's much more easy to get people involved and participate. And when you're going bigger and you have different houses in different areas from the city, it's getting more complicated and different. So I think in the cooperative you have like 3 circles where people can be involved. First of all is in your own flat, doing all the domestic stuff and sometimes conflict about washing dishes, or like you have maybe have there too. Then you have the second level of involvement on your own building between all the different units and with the neighborhood. And the third level of investment is the whole cooperative. If we can go to the slide before, the previous slide, so you can see we try to decentralize the most we can and let all the houses have made their own choice, made their own casting to choose the new tenant. And but we have so we have the old houses with every houses have represented, and then we have the general council, and we have a working team at the office, which are 5 people working. Most of them were students living in the cooperative, and then they continue to work there, to do all the administrative stuff. And we have the council, which is a group with the working team, and also including students from every houses, and we discuss about all the politics, the projects, and then the final and the most important is the General Assembly. So every people living at the Sigu are member because they have a share, and they have, with the share you have 1 vote. So you can come at the assembly to vote on more topics, all the topics, the big issues. Yes. What else? I think that's it. We have a slide, issues and challenges. Yeah. So yeah, we are working hard on social cohesion. As getting bigger, we have also more conflicts sometimes, living together. So we have also working groups, like you said. I don't remember where in Australia. I think so. They try to help mediation, like blue helmet in some situation, and yeah, basically that's it.
Great. Thank you so much for also explaining the the different levels of engagement and how it's more structured, and how the students can how the participation works throughout the co-op at different levels. So thank you so much for that. I then had like some a question that is more about maybe honing in on some of the specific aspects of your different models. So when we were preparing this webinar, we'd kind of started pointing out some of the differences and starting to think about, like, some specific aspects that the speakers can tell us a bit more about. So maybe can we start with Bronwyn this time around? And we've already heard that the Institute is quite popular and there's already been people attending. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Because it seems to be a very successful initiative that apparently everybody wants to go to. So can you tell us a bit more about it, please?
I would love to, yeah. So NASCO Institute is kind of NASCO's flagship program. It's basically an annual conference. It's short for Cooperative Education and Training Institute. So it's kind of like a quick co-op education weekend. It's usually in person, but this year we are doing a virtual NASCO Institute. It's coming up in just a few weeks now. Somehow it's November 5th through 8th. And like I said, it's going to be online. So usually we have a big gathering, about 300 or 400 co-opers from across the US and Canada that come together, and occasionally some international folks too. We're always very happy to welcome international folks. This year, because we're doing it virtual, we just don't know if we're going to have a much smaller number or a much larger number of people, but we're preparing for all possibilities, and we're excited to be able to offer some of the cool options that a virtual meeting offers. So it's 3 days. It's a ton of educational workshops. We have panels and discussions. We talk about co-op movement history, tools for creating anti-oppressive spaces, professional development and networking opportunities. The theme of this year is choose your own future. That's the theme of the event this year, and that's the kind of description of it on the slide there. But I'll just kind of list off some of the sessions we're offering. This is just like a little teaser. Housing justice in the age of coronavirus, talking co-op, becoming fluent in co-ops, how to transfer your co-op skills into paid employment, creating a new co-op. That's a 6-part series we offer every year that goes through kind of a step-by-step of developing brand new cooperatives, introduction to economic democracy, and restorative conversation. So as you can see, we kind of go through a whole range of topics, everything from administration and organization to some of the more interpersonal conflict questions and building community and anti-oppression and things like that as well. NASCO Institute is really for co-opers of all skill and experience levels. Our community is very open and welcoming. And like I said, we're really excited to have the conference be a little bit more accessible by holding it online this year, especially for international cooperators to attend. So we hope you all join us. Thanks.
Great, that's very exciting, and it's great to know that we can, that this year everybody can join, regardless of budget or anything. So, you know, we don't even have to travel. So there are some advantages to the period we're in. Jens, maybe can I ask you if you can intervene next?
For us, it's really exciting because I think our co-op is one of the only student housing co-ops in Germany. Normally, the cheap student housing is made by the public sector, by Studentendorf. They have in Berlin, I think about 10,000 rooms. So we are really a special thing in Germany. So for us, it was really interesting to hear about other student housing co-ops, first time at NASCO and now again here. So, and we made development from everything is empty and everything is destroyed step by step. And we learned a lot of things for us. And we have about 40 people who's working for the co-op. And we are on a point where we can say, okay, everything is fine, everything is saved. What we have to do now is making a good job to have a place for students from all over the world. We have sometimes about 85% international students. And what we see is that international students don't get a room into the city, especially when they come from Africa, from South America, from Asia. So we want to be a place where people can come and can live in without any things, you know, that we said, where do you come from? What do you want to? And this is a free place, and we want to have a strong community so that people can live here. And next thing is what Bronwyn said about that people who don't have much money from their parents or their own, that they find a place where they can live with an affordable rent, and where they can meet and together with other people studying. That's what we want to do. And when we get a strong community in the next years, it will be really fun. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much for also sharing your future perspectives. Can I ask who's up next? Can I ask Scott if you wouldn't mind sharing a bit more, maybe of the community shares, or other aspects that you'd like to mention that are particular to your mind?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose just to kind of give a bit of the context for SCH itself and its evolution from its idea to its inception. The core questions was like, why did we need student co-op homes? Because it's very nice to like have our own version of NASCO and all that kind of thing, but it also kind of needs to serve a purpose. And so the issues we were coming up against when after Birmingham, Edinburgh, and Sheffield got going, there were other groups who wanted to immediately emulate and go for it. The problem was this list of things. So there are still to this day no dedicated housing cooperative loan products. They are kind of imperfect mortgages from a very, well, not imperfect, they're good lenders, but it's a very small group of institutions that will lend to student housing co-ops. And so it's easier to negotiate that if you're a federation representing a member, for example, and making these acquisitions on an asset base than it is as a group of students turning up in a bank going with like an 80% mortgage on this, and they look at you like you're a bit weird. And there were other issues around. We had a model and idea with what to do, but we didn't have that apparent source of those loan deposits to get these things going. Students were perceived as high risk because we're high turnover, which is like also a good thing, but it's also got its issues. I think that was raised earlier. And obviously in the UK context, we had very little financial record. It's very easy for us to point to the US, Canada, the Studentendorf and go, look, it works, people do it. People would go, yeah, but why has no one done it in the UK? And so we had this like cultural barrier to come across to an extent. There's also one that's not on there, which is also really important as to why you want to have kind of a commonwealth of your property assets. And this will be the same in many different contexts. There are areas in the UK where there are universities and it is easier by pure economics to launch housing co-ops because the property and the land is just cheaper. If you're thinking of going to many southern cities in the UK and particularly London, there's no way you will crack that. There's no way of making that financially viable unless you have an asset base to leverage against. So if we're going to do national cooperative development and roll them out across the UK, you need to have a structure that's going to permit that. Otherwise, you're going to have a situation where a few spring up, get really successful, but it's all very lopsided as to where it is in the UK. And to us, that was kind of not equitable. And we should try and get this everywhere. Next slide, please. There we go. So yeah, we essentially, Sean Farmello, who was one of the founders, there he is. He's actually on his visit in that image to Ann Arbor, I believe. Went around and kind of viewed some housing co-ops, asked that question, as I said earlier, why don't we have these? And he had long conversations with NASCO staff at the time around their model to get his head around it. And the thing is that I think it's important to say the kind of federations that many of you guys are describing, where a central body of some description owns all the assets and then you devolve things down to the individual properties or clusters or whatever, is not the model that the UK has traditionally used. The models we more use are individual complexes, clusters of houses, or in the case of one organization, Radical Roots, that is more basically a federation of individual housing co-ops that own their own house, but they all come together and they will like share that equity, but it's more on a voluntary basis. We do have a bit of an issue structurally in the UK, particularly England actually, in the English side of things, is that there are many housing co-ops that sit on asset bases that are not leveraged and not used for the kind of the common good of spreading the movement. And that's just kind of, it's nobody's fault, but there's also been no kind of structures that encourage that engagement. So when we were kind of starting student housing co-ops from kind of scratch, we kind of went, okay, let's learn the lessons. Let's look at what works and let's make that work in our context. And so that's why we wanted to try that model of having a national organization. So we had a report generated around 2015. I wasn't actually directly involved at that point in that work, but it was done, it was created, it was paid for by one of the big retail cooperatives. So there was already evidence of engagement from the existing cooperative sector that they kind of wanted to help. There was an acknowledgement this could be something that's exciting and it could generate more cooperators and, a younger generation of cooperators. Next, please.
Scott, I might have to ask you to slightly accelerate if that's okay.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. So yeah, basically how it developed from paper to practice. So we had an original model outlined in that report. It's still out there if you want to read it, go ahead. It basically was a much more kind of traditional NASCO properties model in terms of like only really the co-ops that resided within the members really only had control. Now, the problem there was a really awkward mechanism designed to raise finances and capital, and it just was unfeasible as a proposal. And in the end, our regulators stopped that structure from being used. So other co-ops who used it had to stop using it. So we moved to a multi-stakeholder approach, where 75% of the control is controlled by the student housing cooperatives, institutionally, individual members, sorry. The rest is to our supporter and investors. And that was actually seen as a positive transition because we saw it as the cooperative movement is investing in young cooperators. Therefore, they have a stake in it and helping make it function. They provide directors to all the awards of the organization. They actually are supporting us. They're not telling us what to do. It's very much about this needs to be a cooperative. I'm going to go for the buzzword. And so, yeah, moving that along, we went to Cooperatives UK. They were very aware of the project for a long time. They don't traditionally develop co-ops in this way, but they agreed to take us on because Neil, who was from another sector of the cooperative economy, his son had lived in Austin, right, in Austin-based co-ops, and so he saw the difference that made to his son and like the life skills and things he did. And so student housing co-ops were made part of the National Cooperative Development Strategy. Next, please. And so we kind of went from there. And so we launched what was known as community share issue. So it's a special form of withdrawable share capital. The issue went live, I can't remember, it was October or November last year. And the basics of it is that if you could invest £50 up to 50 to 250,000, sorry, 50 to 250 pounds, you could have a stake in Student Co-op Homes. You would hold shares. You would also only have one member, one vote, so it's still cooperative. So it wasn't, regardless of your size of investment, it was still kind of on cooperative principles. If you went over £250, you then got interest on your share, etc. And so the campaign went to the upper limit of 2 million, which would have been a fully self-sustaining organization with loads of staff and all this kind of thing, was the maximum aim. Next, please. That went live. And this is kind of the roughs of the financial principle that might be useful to other co-ops to have this kind of image. But in essence, we have our shares, our loan finance, and it's a very cyclical situation as to how we fund ourselves. The rent pays off the mortgages. It's very simple economically to explain. The only thing it doesn't include is that SCH has been trying to negotiate leases for our members on big halls and things like that, which we might not be able to buy. We might be able to increase that capacity. It sounded similar to what the Seb said from Geneva in terms of accessing property that might not be there all the time, but we can help while we're there. Next, please. And so, yeah, that was the community share issue, went up on the FX platform. That was the nice, pretty front of it. It raised about £300,000. And it was a success in that regard because it's a very unconventional community share issue. So for context, community share issues generally grow around organizations that say want to buy a pub. Their pub is closing down. The community wants to buy it, reinvigorate it, renovate it. They get a stake in it. That's kind of where that normally goes. Ours was very unconventional in that we were asking people to invest in a national organization, not in a place, and not even in a physical thing at that stage, but obviously to be invested in property. And so actually it was a really good success because, to be honest, even though we had the backing of Cooperatives UK, all this kind of thing, at the end of the day, a majority of the control is with a bunch of students. So it was really kind of invigorating and great that there was kind of a show of confidence, especially as the first step. And we might go back to doing share issues in the future to raise more capital to grow, but we need to prove that track record. Next, please. And so kind of our next steps, even in COVID land, as I've kind of nicknamed this weird existence, is that we are in the process of purchasing our first property for the Nottingham Student Housing Cooperative. So I'm very happy. There is another acquisition will go ahead for the Glasgow Student Housing Cooperative. They're currently reviewing the market, the housing market in the UK because of COVID and changes to bunch of taxes they made has made things go a bit crazy all at once. They didn't really help things. And from there also just kind of other things that are going on. The Sea Salt Student Housing Cooperative in Brighton are also doing a share issue with a partner organisation, which is their local community land trust. So I'd encourage people to have a look at that if you're interested. And you know, we are planning to get things up and running, and there is negotiations going on to bring the Birmingham and Sheffield assets, those two properties that already were purchased by the phone co-op back in the day, into Student Cooperative Homes as assets we will then own. So it's kind of in a positive that we're bringing together the existing asset base and we're also creating new student housing co-ops, and from there we can really get things going. So I'll leave that there.
Great, very exciting future plans. And as you said, it was quite a groundbreaking initiative in terms of the community shares. I would like to ask Seb if you wanted to talk more about maybe the temporary rental buildings or specific aspects of your model.
That's how we started, basically. And the main goal, however we do it, by building or renting and sub-renting to our member, the goal is to make affordable student houses. So like all of yours, when we started from nothing. And at the beginning, we only have a couple of houses that were borrowed or maybe rent by landlords. And at that time, instead of saying, okay, we're not gonna pay no rent or just paying the electricity, the heating costs and stuff like that, we decided to make a little rent, but like not too much. And like this, we did accumulate our own capital during the 15 first years. And after 15 years, we had enough, I don't know how you say it in English, you own fund to obtain a mortgage. And something, I don't know how it is in your countries, but in Switzerland, when you are a cooperative, you need only 5% of own money to get a mortgage. So after 15 years, that was possible. We had a 2 million first house, the cost of building the new house, and we had to put only between quotes 100,000 that we did save that money during 15 years. So that was pretty easy. And that was hard to find a bank to borrow us that money, to how you feel, to do the loan for us. But they were thinking, who are those hippies? They want to have to play in the real estate business and all that. That was crazy. But we found a bank which is called Alternative Bank of Switzerland, which is a fair trade bank, and they did support us, and it works. So then 5 years later, when we built the second house, that was more easy to show that a couple of hippies with dreams, they can make it up. And well, that's how we grew up, basically. And here are some pictures of two The one of the left was an old building. We did a historical building from the beginning of the last century, and we did buy it and how you say, renew it. So you see the before after picture with the renewable. And the other one is a big apartment with 10 people and big common spaces. This is the kitchen, pretty big. Before and after, when people got in, you see the wall painted, and they just appropriate the space, and that's really cool. This house is also built in a eco neighborhood. I don't know, which is a brand new neighborhood with different co-ops. We have our houses, but there are different co-ops. This is a neighborhood without cars. There are no street with cars. It's all ecological. All the standards of the housing is also important for us. We have the highest standard in ecological consumption, solar panels, rainwater recycling, gardening all around, chicken. It's very cool, the eco neighborhood. Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's so interesting to, you know, to have that long-term vision of going from like, okay, we could just not pay rent, but if we pay rent, then maybe we can grow. So, and then getting the first people that believe in you, and actually now the results are like top standard environmental housing. You know, it's such a wonderful and inspiring journey, and it's great what can be achieved actually. So yeah, and I'd like to now invite Farron, if you can share a few words about some specificities about your model.
Sure. There's two things I'm going to talk about. One is the solar that we have set up at Stucco, which was a more recent project. So because we set up 28 years ago, that part of the is a sort of history, but this is some more recent history. And of course, it seems to have gone on very similar lines to other cooperatives and the setting up. So the solar panels, it's the first of this type of solar setup in Australia. That is like between multiple units with a storage system. Often when we have solar panels in the cities, there isn't a battery setup. So it started as in 2015, and we got a grant from the council of 80,000 Australian dollars. And it was a bit of a test case to see how this, having solar panels on like rental properties and with this many units would work. There's a total of 114 panels across the roofs. You can see in the second slide a bit of the other roof, and the grant didn't cover all of it, so there was a lot of other costs that came from our rent, and also a lot of volunteer hours went into setting it up, both people who were current members, but the project was also headed by a few people who'd moved out and were previous tenants. It now covers about 80% of our energy usage. It depends on the season, how much heating or cooling we're requiring. But it's also really great because we have a system where it feeds back onto the grid. So when we have more energy being created from our beautiful sunny skies in Australia, we are feeding that electricity so that other houses in the neighborhood can use it. And we get a small amount of money from the electricity companies or the government from that electricity that we feed back. We're also, as part of that, solar panels need replacing every 20 to 30 years. So we've got a savings fund that we put into for the eventual replacement of the panels. As you can see there, currently electricity is included within our rent, which helps keep bills down. but we have experimented with different ways of allocating payments for our residents with that. And the second thing, as you can see in the next slide, that I feel is really special about what Stucco does is that we have a temporary accommodation service. So we have 6 spare rooms, one in each of the downstairs units, and people who are facing homelessness, who are students, get referred to us. Sometimes they know about us and contact us directly, or sometimes the university puts them in contact with us. So if you go on to the next slide, there's a room. It's the spare room in my unit. We call them the Temp Rooms. And it's really great that we get to offer this. People can have up to 6 weeks of free rent. And occasionally that gets extended if people are still unable to find housing, but it gets reviewed on a 2-weekly basis. And it's really valuable because we have people who come from all different areas, and it means that people are able to continue with their university studies. It's been really good because many of the people who currently live here have actually come to us firstly through the emergency accommodation and then later become members, because one of the major things we prioritize is that need to be in affordable housing. And it's quite striking how many people come from minority backgrounds and face other disadvantages. So we also prioritize supporting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, people from the queer community, and other marginalised backgrounds, which I think is a really important part of what we do as a co-op.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's interesting to see how innovation can be both technical, you know, like the solar panels, but also both more social and really think of how to be inclusive. And it's interesting that that safety net of that period without rent then allows a lot of people to actually remain on the long term. So it sounds like a really great system. So thank you to everybody, to the participants to the speakers for explaining all of these different aspects. It's just such an incredible variety of examples from out there. We're quite short on time. We just wanted to pick 2 quick questions from the audience, since unfortunately we can't go on for much longer. And then maybe if anybody that wants to respond, to say something about those questions, any panelists that would like to can just go ahead and say what they think. Maybe with so the questions, one is around the relationship between the student co-ops and external organizations. So for example, universities, co-op federations, etc. So what, is there something to say about that connection? Maybe in particular, maybe about like universities or kind of like learning facilities. La Sigu said that they don't just work with universities, so that's quite interesting too. So maybe if we can know a bit more from whoever wants to participate about that. And at the same time, I'm also going to ask a second question, if I can find it. It has been sent to me. Oh yes, what happens once people are no longer students? What happens at that point? So if anybody wants to respond to either of these questions, we'll have a few brief moments on that before we call it a day.
I can speak to the other organisations because Stucco as a building is 2/3 owned by our Department of Housing, 1/6 owned by the University of Sydney, and 1/6 owned by us as a cooperative. And that came about, we were originally got a loan from the university for the 1/6 of the building, and for the first, I think, about 20 years of our existence, we were paying that off. So it's been more recent that we have managed to secure that. And then the university holds our capital account as part of that. So we pay money into that and then can access that money when we need to do major works to the building. But we pay about half of our money into that as a sort of savings account. Other than that, we have a quite autonomous arrangement with we have the full management of the building and don't get too much, there isn't too much problems with control over that, other than having to make sure that we are responsibly looking after the building. We also work with Common Equity, which is our housing cooperative body that looks after all housing cooperatives in New South Wales, at least. And we aren't owned by them, unlike some of the other cooperatives, but we do employ their accountant and some of the services that we sometimes require. As well as working, there's another cooperative in Canberra in Australia, and the other one is setting up in Wollongong.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to reply to either that same question? I see Jens is raising his hand.
We work together with Free University and with Humboldt University. We have, I think, about 100 to 150 rooms reserved for the Erasmus exchange program, so that people who come from all over Europe can have a room here in our villages. We have two in between. I didn't mention the second one. And also for summer schools, and so we have short time rooms. One house with 30 rooms is for you can stay here for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Sometimes some professors have programs like this. Oh. And we engaged in the Alliance of Young Co-ops here in Berlin. These are co-ops who was founded after 1990. We have a political task to get more government money to build new co-op houses, to make affordable housing, and that's a hard thing here in Berlin. So, but this is our voice in the city, here in the city, and we also engaged in some other co-op organizations in Berlin and in Germany as well. Yeah, that's
great. Thank you. I don't know if anybody else wants to respond to this one, or to what happens once you're not a member anymore. You know, what happens to you, and maybe if somebody also has to share, you know, is there a relationship that keeps on existing? I see Seb is raising his hand.
Okay, for us, when you no more meet the criteria, the main criteria is to be a student or an internship. Unfortunately, we ask you to leave because you might earn money, have a job, and just make the rotation for the next one who are poor student and need it. And but as it is really hard to find something in Geneva, for example, we are we are cool. I mean, when you get your diploma, you don't have to leave the next day. Sometimes you have people who say, I don't find, I'm in trouble, whatever. So we most of the time accept to give some delay, like 3 months, sometimes 6 months to find something, even if it's out of the criteria. Because we are living a housing crisis in Geneva, and we know how hard it is, and so we try to be cool. We count the delay in months, not in years, sure, but in months, yes, we do. And when people leave, most of the time we refund the social share they bought when they came in, like a deposit, I mean, and the next one is buying a social share. So we have in, out, and the result is the same. So most of the time when people leave, like 90% of the time, they are no more member. They don't have the status of member. But some who really want and have the mean to leave their social share, they can keep they keep on being members, but non-living members, like how you say, members who don't live there, but they have they are invited to the General Assembly. They have the right to vote, to share the experience, maybe being a bit older, but most of the time people lose their membership when they leave and get refunded. And the maximum time is 5 years. Sometimes we give an extra year, 6 years maximum staying time.
Yeah, I imagine it must be very, very difficult to leave, but it has to be done, I guess. Bronwyn, maybe a final point from you, and then we'll draw things to a close if that's all right.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say that cooperative housing is an affordable housing solution for everyone, not just for students. And we really encourage that a lot within our network. In fact, a lot of our members either have expanded to include any community members, or they've created additional properties that are not just for students. We see that a lot, and we're seeing that a lot right now with COVID too, how a lot of co-ops are responding to university closures and things like that by maybe taking in more community members who are in search of affordable housing. Another thing that we see a lot, especially in kind of cities with larger co-op systems, like in Austin, Texas, or in Ann Arbor, Michigan, is that especially because NASCO is very involved in providing the education around what you need to do in order to start a new housing cooperative, a lot of students end up moving out of their co-op and actually banding together with some of their other housemates to create a new co-op that's not just for students. So in Austin and Ann Arbor specifically, you see a whole system of cooperatives that are not student-based, but include a lot of members who were previously living in the student co-ops who have decided to continue living in a co-op and increasing that accessibility for folks who are no longer students. So I wanted to touch on that.
Great. So that's encouraging to know that there is a life beyond, beyond the student. Once you're not a student anymore, that there are solutions. There's ways to stay engaged or to stay housed in a co-op in various ways. So that's great. That's positive news for all of us. I think we're going to end on that positive note in terms of all the questions, etc. So thank you all. I'll pass the ball back to Julie, which I'll also thank for having me as moderator. It's been really, really fun to be part of this amazing panel.
Thank you, Mariangela, and thank you, Bronwyn, Jens, Farron, Seb, Leah, and Sebastien. If you can thank Joan, and thank you, Scott. I know it's late in many other parts of the world. Here in Canada, it's still afternoon. It was pouring rain and now the sun has come out, so maybe there's a rainbow. So I just wanted to mention that we are in the pre-planning phase of our next webinar, which will continue on the same theme of student housing cooperatives, and we'll get more into the nuts and bolts topics like student turnover. How do you handle the student turnover? What's the governance structure? Maybe dive into a little bit of asset management, property management. Who does what, and then how to start a housing project with people who have no money. And we touched on that a little bit, but so we probably won't be able to touch on all of these in one webinar, but we'll just, if you follow us on our social media channels, we will be advertising the details of the webinar that hopefully will be in January. So it was really nice to connect with all of you, and I hope that we can continue these conversations in the new year. Any final comments from anyone? No. Okay. I think we're all we're all beat. We're webinared out. Okay. Thanks everyone, and see you again. Take good care. Stay COVID free. Okay. Bye.